Okay, and you can see me? Great. Okay, so today I'm gonna share my screen.
Oh, what's the point? How'd you get this? This like a stream. No, that's like there.
Okay, so today we're gonna assemble our Foldscope. So looks like you have all already gotten started, which is a really great sign. So people on Zoom, you don't have your Foldscopes yet. We are getting those sent. They're probably gonna send out sometime next week. But in the meantime, we are gonna oh, I should share my screen on there. We are gonna go through the assembly and you guys can follow along, and if you have questions, of course. And then the second half of the class, we're actually going to go over to a lake nearby and collect samples and start to look. But of course, once you get your own Foldscopes, you can build them. You can also ask questions on Discord if you have trouble building them. And then you can also share online, whatever you guys find in your local environments. And then let me. Okay.
Yeah, like, I think it's like
So what I'll do, Ellie, I'll work with all of you to work with the students. I'll talk to the things that are much more on the online website. And then I think the idea would be is let's do this maybe the next 20 minutes or so, and then we head out to the.
Sounds good. So they're on here. They're all on here right now, and they're looking at the video. If you wanted to talk to them.
I'll kind of.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'll skip that video for a
Okay.
second. I'll just talk to them.
Okay, I'm gonna stop sharing. Actually, Minu's gonna talk to you guys. Okay. I wasn't sharing it. Okay. I'm gonna mute myself.
Can you guys hear me?
Okay.
Yeah, and then I think you guys should
Yes.
basically work with people. It's kind of fun to have design discussions around like, alternative and ways of thinking about so they actually understand. And then the big, most common thread there is polarity of magnets and other things. And if you haven't built one before, you should both of you should build them. Yeah. It's important to kind of get your hands going. Can you guys hear me? So what we're doing
Yes, we
today
can.
is putting together a Foldscope. And I think we've shipped or started shipping these, so these should reach you at some point of time a little bit later. But while we kind of do that, maybe a set of a conversation that I wanted to have was, we can talk a little bit about the Foldscope side of the story itself, and then there are a couple of resources that I want to share that are much more of the online side of that story. So, and what is accessible. So let me just open for a second the opening discussion that we had. I'm just opening a slide deck for a second for all of you. I'm curious, can I get a raise of hands, at least for the folks online? How many of you have actually used a Foldscope or literally have a Foldscope? How many of you have a Foldscope? Literally, you have it with you right now. Awesome. Okay, so, and then where would you rate yourself in your Foldscoping abilities? Like you can type on chat, like in terms of, for example, have you imaged a bacteria using a Foldscope yet? Just try typing or kind of links of any of the videos or data that you might have taken through your Foldscope. And I think one thing that I'm going to try to do is focus on more of the advanced techniques. So I'm curious if you share here any links or anything to something that you might have seen or observed with your Foldscope while I open up this one thing for a second. I'm just looking for a slide deck that I want to show you guys for a second.
He recently got a girl. Yeah, apparently he had a pack. We're not gonna get open. It literally fucking single. I think it took about. We're gonna do content. No sense. Yeah, no.
Okay, so I think this is what I want to show you guys. One of the threads for the folks who don't have a Foldscope is this is a very experiential object. So there's very little that I can tell you other than have you experience it. But the context, and I think when I will talk a little bit about the case study around Foldscope, the primary purpose of thinking about this tool is really how do you think about curiosity? And how do you think about curiosity in a context of everyday person, everyday moment? Most often the microscopic world is such that you need tools to be able to see it. And I think when we started almost around 11 years ago, the context was, could you do something like this from a sheet of paper? And that's kind of what led to the design that's very specific. This is not the original design. This is like the 300th version. So if you search Foldscope old designs, I'll see if I can actually find that in Foldscope history. There is an image. I don't know if it's there. Yeah, so I think that image is not here, but so you can see this was the original design, and there are certain design changes that are quite dramatic. For example, the original design required you to be actively holding the focus in place while the current focus is actually stabilized. There are other aspects of this associated with if you've all seen the original paper, for example, then we demonstrated you can do fluorescence microscopy with this, you can do dark field, you can do lens arrays. So all of you should take a look at the original paper. So you have a context of everything that can be done with this tool, and you can actually modify to add certain sets of things that are not in. So the purpose of this is really for you to be able to hack together certain kinds of things and add functionalities to it. Often enough, when you kind of think about in terms of data, and for the folks that do have a Foldscope in hand, this is the kind of data that I'm expecting for all of you to be able to collect as well. So what you're looking at is, for example, just some pond water. And this is a trick that's called phase contrast. You can literally see single bacteria in there. You can see single cilia. And, one of the perspectives of this is you have to practice and train yourself to be good, to be able to collect high quality data. And it's very important to kind of train and practice in a sense, because it'll give you the right, when you're out in the field, the purpose of this is this data is collected out in the lake, for example. And so that's what we will do in a little bit. And I think this is kind of why I'm saying that all of you have to sort of, even if you might have a Foldscope, you might actually not realize the power of the tool and the kind of things that you can actually build and visualize with it, unless you really spend time with your own hands, training yourself in a manner that essentially allows you to utilize it to its full potential. And so I think for folks that have a Foldscope in hand, keep that in mind, that you should be able to collect the kind of data that is out online. And then I'll show you the kind of data that's out online in a second. And of course, there are a couple of rules of Foldscope Club, and I'll talk a little bit about that. Just like the analogy of, I don't know if you guys know Fight Club. The movie Fight Club has rules. So Foldscope Club is, if you have access to a Foldscope, you must share it with someone who, without your intervention, would have never seen through a microscope before. So it's not about just our own self and our own capabilities. It is about sharing that passion with someone else. And it can't be just your kids, although you should work with your kids, as I can see Deborah is. It has to also be outside your own realm, because it becomes very important when you're sharing certain sets of tools. And what you'll realize is you learn a new kind of a skill associated with that. And that skill is, how do you have a science conversation with anybody at any time? It's, you have to sort of justify why you're having that conversation, and it becomes an incredibly important way of thinking. And so many of our Foldscope users, you might argue, don't look like traditional scientists per se, but it becomes very important, and it has no context of age group. Of course, we think about working with kids is important. We spend a lot of time with that, but it's not something that is the only thread that we focus on. So that's another very important thing to kind of think about, is work with any age group that you actually care about and think about. At this point, it's a very large community, and kind of I want to highlight, and I'll focus on a few regions for a second. This is a very old map, so it's not really true, but you can see, every corner of India is covered in many ways. But then you can also see, there are users in Iraq, there are users in Saudi Arabia, but you can also see there are significant regions of Africa that are not covered. And so kind of, Marwan, I'm looking at you as sort of the champion for Foldscope in Sudan, because when you start thinking about this, and of course, this is quite old, so this map is now quite well covered, but still there are regions. For example, we just got back from DRC with a very large number of workshops across DRC. You can also think about this in the context of Latin America for folks that are connecting from Latin America. Certain sets of ideas travel across sometimes just naturally, but other times you actually need that kind of a support network that's actually necessary to be able to share a given idea. And so many of you, Indonesia is a great example, and many of the people that are in the call, I recently met via that framework. And this map is around 4 or 5 years old. And it becomes very important when you're thinking about this in the context of the kinds of problems that you're thinking of tackling with the tool like this. So I'll show you a few sets of pictures of just, what does Foldscope community work actually look and feel like. So this is an example. Give me 1 second. I'm going to set up something And then we'll just open up for discussions for a minute. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the way. That's the way. I think so. Design, baby.
Can you guys hear me? You can hear me. Okay. Yeah, so I think, one of the fun things about much of the work that we do with this tool is driven primarily by and with communities. And the idea is that you empower a given community to engage, but the problems that they tackle with the tool are actually driven by their own sets of incentives and approaches. And you bring capabilities to the table, but we don't dictate the kinds of problems that people are interested in. That comes with a dialogue with the people that you actually engage with. So, this is one example in an agricultural context. This is from a rural area in Chhattisgarh. Here is an example from a context of conservation biology. There is a lot of conservation programs that use Foldscope to identify pathogens in animals. This happens to be the beloved elephants. You can actually identify parasites. There is a program in gorilla conservation that actually uses, because gorillas in contact with humans can catch human pathogens, especially many sets of diseases that cause diarrhea. There are fishing communities. So fishing communities, the sets of programs are much more about the health of the plankton associated with the water bodies. And again, all of these ideas came from the community itself. All we are trying to do is just support the community. And so when you're thinking about projects, and if you're very excited about implementing community-driven projects, it becomes very valuable for you to understand what is a kind of a problem that the community cares about solving. Here is another example. This is from Iraq. This is right after the war, when the Iraq war ended, is a class of Foldscope clubs that started across Iraq, primarily for kids that had never been to school for the longest time because of the war. And again, it's driven by Muhammad, who started the club because he felt very strongly that most of the kids had never had the chance to go to school. And so they really felt, how do you really bring curiosity and creativity in a framework when kids have lost 5-6 years of school life? And again, this program still continues. There is a challenge that I'm going to pose to everybody in the class today. It's called the Foldscope Street Challenge. Mohammed and I came up with that idea just in terms of challenging each other, which is to do a Foldscope workshop every single day for 30 days in a row. And it can be for one child, it can be for a few kids, but it's about the continuity that matters. And, Mohammed really pushed that idea to a point where for the last 145 days, he has continuously run a Foldscope workshop on the streets of Iraq. And so if you go to his Twitter channel, you will see every day he posts a video or a photograph of the kids that he's working with. Sometimes he'll go to the vegetable seller. Sometimes he will go to the pharmacist. Sometimes he goes to a soccer game. Sometimes he will go essentially to the bike fixing shop. Anywhere he can find kids. But the idea is to remove this notion that science is only done in school. You have to bring that into the everyday life. And I mean, it's an incredible example. And when I talk a little bit about this, I'll document some of his work. But if you go online, for example, and if I type Twitter and I search Muhammad Abbas, okay.
stays on the paper. Whatever tool.
Let's see if there is a way to search. Anybody knows how to search?
You can just do a Control F thing in your followers list.
Oh, that's a good idea. Ah. Let me do that here.
At MUHAMEDSCI.
Yeah, I found that's good. Yeah, you guys found him faster than I did. So that's kind of the challenge. It started as for just 21 days, but then it kept going and it's been 140 days now. And literally, you know, this is 2 days ago and it's 154th day. And, you know, the reason these types of things matter is because suddenly you start thinking about, you know, what can one person do? We often feel very much like, oh, we're just one person. What role can we play? Could we actually be the a change in a given set of a community? And I think he demonstrates this in its just entirety. So that's the barber shop. You can see when he goes to get a haircut, you can see the barber materials at the back. Then I'll show you the, you know, of course, this is just on the street. Then I know there's now, you know, this is a play area and people start associating science in the context of this is a very young user, for example. And, you know, this just goes on and on and on and on. And, you know, this is a food place. And then there is another one that's a bike shop. And one of the things that starts to happen with something like this is that you embody the science that you deeply care about in your daily life. And that embodiment is incredibly important. And you might think that you're doing it for someone else, but what that gives you is gives you the kind of observation tools to make you yourself as a better observer or a better scientist or a better anthropologist. You start understanding the sets of problems in education when you have these many conversations for that long. So I think an important thing to think about this is not just a tool for microscopy or the microscopic world. It's a way to engage with people and have the kind of conversations that then lead you to better understand the kinds of challenges we have in education, the kinds of challenges that we have in, say, the environmental context, if you care about the environmental context. So I think use that as a framework. And then, of course, we use a single place where all of this data is deposited. So now I'll just show you the website. This is the older version of the website that anybody, all of you have an account once you get a Foldscope, and you can essentially document and write what you explore right here. And so if I go, so I'm going to go to this site, and then if I go explore, as you can see, these are posts. So maybe since I know, you know, so I zoomed in on Indonesia, and that looks like Bali. I know this is from Elaine. And now this is a sand crab's eye in a Zimbura beach in Bali. And it's documented. This is Elaine, and Elaine is in the class right now. I can log in, and then I can write down, and I can make a comment. Oh, it's like, oh, I think this is the species that you observed, for example. And so one of the important aspects of this is being able to document and share what you do becomes incredibly important, because the way that you learn is by writing and framing. So you can see this is a post from Ethan in the lab. we happen to have these salt marshes that have these organisms that are really colorful. Anybody who comes to San Francisco with flight sees these from sky. And it's an incredible phenomena. But then you go down, and so Ethan documented the entire history of that. And then, of course, went and found which ones are the microorganisms by sampling them and identifying the sets of microbes that he could find in these salt marshes to begin with. These are very high salt concentration pools. And so one of the nice things that ends up happening with that is, sharing and documenting your process is incredibly important, because in a scientific thing, this is really what you're trying to learn. So again, you can all be in different phases of your Foldscope journey. What you kind of have to keep in mind is that there is a lot more to learn along the way. And I think, the big thread to think about is that eventually, once you have gone to a point where now it's time to share that more formally, a lot of Foldscope users then write in stories and papers, different ways of communicating those sets of ideas. So for example, this is a very broad range of applications of publications that have used Foldscope so all the way from diagnostics, animal health, agriculture, education, sanitation, biodiversity mapping, lots of machine learning usage, and lots of miscellaneous sets of things about people exploring completely new applications. And this is sort of a challenge for all of you itself as well, is to both see the breadth of things that can be done, but also explore and find new things. And then maybe I'm going to end this by just showing you all this picture. This is a picture from one of the Foldscope super users. This is Mo Pandirajan. He's very famous in the Foldscope community because in the last 4 years, he has trained roughly around 100,000 kids in India. So it's just his proficiency of just engaging with kids is so phenomenal. He travels the country sharing the tool with kids. And, what this picture reminds me of is, of course, so much joy that you can bring to children by just bringing a simple tool to them. But it also reminds me of the challenge of how far we have to go. So as a community, this is roughly around 2 million kids, but there are 2 billion kids on this planet, with roughly around 1 billion of them that live in places where there is very little resources. They will never access science without an intervention from someone in this room. So this is also a challenge. You can see the excitement, but you can see there is one Foldscope for 50 kids in this picture. And we want to change that. And one of the things that's the hardest is this last mile approach. Who is it that's actually engaging? Because, the challenge is, I joke about this, we can manufacture microscopes. Mentors cannot be manufactured. Mentors are in this room, and many of you are the mentors. And you want to be those mentors. I love this photo because here the parents are not sharing the microscope with their own kid. And it sort of creates that scenario of just, you have to be the change that you might want to see in a community that you're interested in. And I think soon enough, one of the big things that we'll try to do is get all of you enough Foldscopes. And then the thread is that once you start using it, once you've had a certain kind of an experience, you've started building a community, there is lots of routes of getting more units to you guys. And it's an important, if you've ever thought about engaging in a much more on a community driven way, this is a phenomenal opportunity for you to try and explore that. You might think, if you've never done that before, it's actually quite a humbling experience to take your scientific and science knowledge and share it in a way that just you're meeting someone where they are. So you're not talking from a high point. You're just there to share and explore. And I think one thing that I want to do is, any of you in this room, if you ever run a Foldscope workshop, I would be curious to hear, how have your thinking changed along the way? I know some of the folks from Indonesia have been running Foldscope workshops since I left. So I'm curious, how have people's thinking changed? But any of you, I'm just curious if you've had the chance to teach using this tool, what have you felt? What have you learned? So we're gonna flip the table. Anybody wants to raise their hand and talk about their Foldscope experiences? And then also we can transition to questions, any sets of questions that you might have in this perspective. Oh, go ahead, Smriti.
I kind of conducted informal, with my classmates. We bought the Foldscope together, and
Yeah.
I was kind of talking to them about like how this is a tool maybe just for us, but also we have access to microscopes in our labs. So how do we bring it to like the students outside campus and people who definitely don't have? And well, I was talking with some people in the social service wing, and they're going to start holding classes for math, science, and English for the community outside our university. And so they were looking for instructors, and they were like, yeah, this seems like an interesting way to introduce science to kids who maybe have phobia towards it. So I mean, with my classmates, we were just like going around campus and collecting like random samples, and we had food, so we looked at that under the microscope. All that kind of stuff. We were just messing around.
Smriti, just so I know, where is it campus physically?
We're in Chandigarh, but actually just outside Chandigarh, there's a location called Mohali. So
Okay.
just there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, Mohali
That's
from
like
from the crickets.
it's a much smaller town. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Anybody else who's had the chance to play or any questions you might have on kind of what I just briefly shared? I know Tafia has been running some workshops in the past. I'm curious, Tafia, what happened since I left?
Hi. Yeah. Me and Elaine, we've been running some workshops, and I think the recent ones is we've done some for junior high school kids, elementary school kids, and my reflection is that yeah, I mean, like I'm sorry, like, but they before like didn't know that such things could happen, but they also like kind of natural in, I mean, like they can direct themselves. And with the elementary school kids, like it's much more younger than the last time we done workshop. So in that way, I realized that we have to use some kind of like different storytelling to them, in a way that that is much more slower to explain about all these things. So yeah, I learned a lot from by seeing like the target groups of like to whom we done the workshops. I don't know what Elaine. What do you think, Elaine?
Yeah, no, I think the idea of age group and who you are working with, you really have to change how you introduce science depending on the age group that you're talking to. And that's a skill that it's very valuable to learn. Oh, go ahead, Marwan.
Yeah, I just hear the concept of Foldscope. I don't use to use it before, but I think in our elementary school, all days we have a curriculum that called Natural Diary. It is just as a small block in a paper note with with engagement of teacher to help a student in elementary school to observe the nature. They record down the weather. They will record down the plant, how it grown in their area,
Yeah.
the birds, the small biological stuff,
Mhm.
and my head is blown when I found this old community based or even young to be this and to be real observation of scientists thinking. But again, I think this is incredible tool to let people access real science. Thanks.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, I love the idea that, I think sometimes all we need is just our eyes and a pencil and a pen to observe the natural world. You don't even need anything more than that. And then to see the microscopic world, you need microscopy. But it's quite valuable to even start, and especially with very young kids. The power to observe is really underrated. Once you learn how to observe, you can apply that everywhere. You can apply that in anthropology. You can apply that in all ways and forms. But often enough, what's right in front of us, we often miss out because, we have never really learned properly how to observe. So I love this idea that they were writing down and saying what plants are there, what birds are there, what insects are there. There's a framework for it to do it quantitatively. It's called BioBlitz, which is map all biodiversity in a given small area. And it's a very classical old technique. And we do that on a microscopic scale also to identify all the microorganisms in a given length scale. So one thing I'm going to do is, Divyanshi, go ahead.
Hello, Dr. Prakash.
Yeah.
Am I audible?
Yes.
I have a question. While I was working on a Frugal project in 2020, we had the idea to design a Frugal telescope. At that time, when I think some problem is there with my video. At that time, when I reached out to the students, I mean, in our college, we had this initiative called the Anokhi Pehal, in which we teach young and underprivileged kids from slums free of cost. So I decided to talk to them about this. However, the feedback which I got was, I mean, one thing which I saw among professors was that the idea of elitism existed in them. They were like, what's the point of telling them? They anyway are not going to use it. And when I showed this stuff to kids, at one point they were very, very happy. But at the other point of time, they were like, I mean, there was this one kid who said, he said it in Hindi, books to khareed nahi pa rahe hain, ye kaise kharidenge? Which means I'm unable to buy the books. How am I going to buy this?
Yeah.
So it kind of intrigued me a lot, and I'm thinking how to make all of these things more inclusive. I have one more question. Like after that 2020 batch only, I started, I developed interest in anthropology, and especially in tribal India. So studying about tribes and seeing participatory observation and doing field work, what I realized is even tribes of India, like those who are PVTGs, particularly vulnerable tribal groups, I mean, they are at one point they are interested, but at the other point, when I like go deeper into it, they are like, yeah, till the time you're coming, it's fine, I'll engage. But after you're gone, they're like, who is going to carry this forward? And since they value their generational things more than the acquired things, it somehow loses its importance. Same happens with education as well as this thing. So, I mean, if you can tell us how to, counterbalance these things, then maybe the inclusive growth of science can happen. And I would definitely love to hear your feedback about it. What you think we should do?
Yeah, no, I think this is a longer discussion. One thing we should definitely do is a dedicated session on community engagement, and especially lessons that people have learned. Most people develop this intuitively as a context of, and it's really context dependent. So the approach, for example, that you would take in one place has to be with understanding the challenges and the constraints that a given community faces. And this is also why many a times the right person to bring these sets of ideas in a given community is somebody who's from the community itself, because they have a very honest and a truthful balance between knowing the value of looking at the night sky and simultaneously knowing and understanding what it means to, not have eaten yesterday. And this is also why the allies that you want to bring in your communities are folks, you focus on one or two people first, where you invest all of your energy in them in the hope that they're going to be the anchors. And your job is to support them, give them a voice, and actually almost get out of the way. And it's hard to do because you almost feel that you're trying to make yourself useless, but that is the point, right? If I had to run Foldscope workshop for every place and every person, that's just not possible. And so often enough, what I'm thinking about is the role. And because there are so many layers in this, you have to be, so often I would, sometimes teachers don't get the idea, but one of the kids does. And then the kid becomes the champion in the class in a given area. And it's just that he or she understands this perspective so deeply of playfulness that the teacher might not. And the teacher would be like, oh, where does it fit in my curriculum? Like, where is it? Which week should I teach it? It's like, I don't know. It's just a way to observe the world. And I can see these types of threads, but it's actually very valuable to learn and document these types of lessons and think deeply. And this is also what the origin of the street science project was, because what we wanted to document is how versatile do you have to be able to engage with just almost anybody. So what I say to all of you would be very different from what I might say to a vegetable seller when I am buying a vegetable and trying to show him what Foldscope means. And this also broadens your own knowledge in science in many ways. That's very, it's quite humbling in many ways. The world is a very big place. It has place for all kinds of opinions, all kinds of ideas. And as you venture out in the world of sharing science, you always have to remember that. And I think you reminded me, Divyanshi, one thing we will do is we'll try running a session that's very much dedicated to community science and have this be the central point of a discussion. Because of course, what I'm curious to hear is examples of what you said, but from all the communities that are represented here. I mean, that sentence now resonates a lot with me when you say, books to kharid nahi pate hain, ye kya kharidenge? And, I think that's been one of the drivers. We have realized that even $1.75 is too much. So we've been thinking about bringing that down to around $1 or 50 cents in many ways. And also, how do you value something? Nature is a book in many ways. And often enough, many naturalists have said, stop reading books, read nature. But it's not what we tell in our classrooms. It's not, nature is the unwritten book. So value of an experience is completely not in the DNA of our education system. The value is in how you take exams and how well you did on those exams. And we have to change that value system as well in many ways. But, don't think about that you would go in and then suddenly all opinions would be changed. It's the aha moments. And I think this is what we are about to do with the class. I can already see they've kind of half built their microscopes. I can see a million errors in how they're using it. And I'm just watching them from the side, and I don't think anybody has had an aha moment as yet. And I think I want them to struggle a little bit as well, because I want it to not be just like, oh, this is how it worked. I want them to genuinely have a moment where they feel like, oh, I got it. And I think this is what you're trying to impart to your users itself. This idea of a self-independence in approaching a problem where they figured it out for themselves. And you were just there to guide it, but you were not there to prescribe it. And there's a very fine balance as a teacher of how to not prescribe everything and let it guide through. I mean, so I think time is really, this is why you have to practice this skill significantly. I see two more hands, Yadnesh and then Smriti. And then I realize then I have to run and help the students in the class. But go ahead, Yadnesh.
Hello, sir. So in Maharashtra, I'm from Maharashtra. So in Maharashtra, we celebrate Ganpati Utsav, like you might know. So
Yes.
in that case, with association with one school, we three boys from our college had to do one workshop in a village area where they don't had microscope. So I had the biology section. So I had bought the Foldscope and I went there with Pyrogyra section and I showed them and then we gifted three for. So like yeah, that's how I also got introduced to Foldscope and now the teachers are teaching as they can't afford microscope. It costs around 6,000, 7,000. So
Yeah.
yeah, now they are teaching them with the help of Foldscope.
Oh, that gives me great joy. And one thing that I just want to remember is for these sets of examples, I'm assuming all of you have accounts on Microcosmos, but if not, sign up and share the kinds of work that you do in the community. So if you look at this link here, you can write down, log in, and then you can create an account, sign up, and then you just put the code of your thing. And then once you've signed up, you will have the capacity to then be connected to the broader community, because this is also another way of the peer-to-peer learning. Everybody in the community is connected to each other, and it becomes very important for us to share these nuances amongst each other, the sets of examples, what worked, what didn't work. So it's a very important community context in that way. So unfortunately, I'm going to run and try helping the students in the class. So we'll connect, I think, and after that, we'll go probably to the pond. But one thing that we should just do is I'll pick up the origami assignment next week, because I think that was the one thing. So you guys can also have the weekend to finish it. And for the folks that do have Foldscopes, try sharing some of your data on Discord on the lab for Foldscope. And I'm assuming everybody has had the chance to submit an address, right? Where we can ship some Foldscopes? Not yet. So if you are listening and you haven't done that, try sending a message to Ellie, Ian, or Abina. I'll ask them. Ellie, did we already collect all the addresses for shipments? Okay, but how do they find out where the Google form is? Okay, so on Discord, there is a Google form that you guys should all fill in so that your address will remain private. It won't be public, but we will have it and we will try to get that out. And I'll ping when those things are arriving on your end. Okay, so I'm going to say bye. I'll catch you guys soon. And I think one of the threads would be is try reading a little bit about the community. I know Deborah was running or building some Foldscopes at home. Do share your experiments. And I mean, I didn't mention this, but there is an infinite amount of YouTube videos on how to build and use. It is a sophisticated tool. So just like you learn how to use a bicycle, you have to use it properly. And so it's important to watch these videos if you want to up your skill level. So take the time and look at those YouTube videos. They're very valuable. Bye, everyone.